In a world of business complexity, execution is everything. This is JD and the Brain, where failure was not an option and performance isn't accidental. Let's get to work.
Welcome to JD and the Brain, the practice of business where leadership theory meets operational reality. I'm Dr. T. Wiles Fowler, joined, as always, by my co-host, JD Cecilia. Whoop, whoop. Today, we continue our journey through the TRAIN model of human resources, encouraging talent development. We talked about the T, tell, teach. We talked about the R, review. We talked about the A last week with assist with Dr. Aidan Brown. And today we arrive at the I, the involve step in the TRAIN model. There is an important progression taking place here. When someone is new, we teach, we tell, we provide direction. As their capability develops, we review, we observe the work, evaluate progress, reinforce expectations, and provide feedback. Then we assist. We stop simply directing and begin working alongside people as they develop the competence and confidence to perform. But eventually, something has to change. The employee cannot remain dependent upon the leader, and the leader cannot remain responsible for doing the employee's thinking. That brings us to the involve step. In the TRAIN model, involve represents a significant transition in talent development. The individual is no longer simply receiving instruction, being reviewed, or requiring routine assistance. They are becoming increasingly capable of taking ownership. Leaders are still present, engaged, and accountable, but the nature of that involvement changes. Leadership involvement should not create dependence. It should create ownership. And I think that distinction has become even more evident as technology, and particularly artificial intelligence, becomes increasingly involved in the way organizations operate. Because today, it isn't only people who are becoming more competent, the machines themselves are becoming more capable as well. AI can analyze an enormous amount of information. They can recognize patterns. It can generate alternatives. It can recommend decisions even. And increasingly, it can execute portions of the work that was once required by direct human involvement. So that creates a fascinating leadership question for today. As technology becomes more involved in the work, how do we make sure as leaders we remain appropriately involved with our people? A leader who has properly developed someone should not need to stand over that person's shoulder, but neither should the leader disappear simply because the employee or now the technology is capable of operating independently. The leader's involvement evolves. Instead of controlling every action, we establish boundaries. Instead of providing every answer, we ask better questions. Instead of solving every problem, we develop judgment. Instead of creating dependence on ourselves, we create responsible ownership in our teams. And regardless how sophisticated our technology becomes, accountability remains human. An algorithm can provide a recommendation, a machine can identify a problem, AI can even participate in the decision. But somebody still has to ask, is this right? Is it ethical? Does it align with our purpose and our values? What does this decision mean for the people affected by it? And ultimately, who owns the outcome? This is leadership's involvement. And that makes tonight's guest particularly appropriate for the I in the TRAIN model. Dr. Oscar A. Rodriguez is a technology and data leader, author, consultant, and educator with more than 2 decades of experience helping organizations translate data, deal with technology, develop strategy into practical business outcomes. Oscar brings together 2 disciplines that organizations can no longer afford to separate. That is technology and leadership. He holds a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. That's where I went. And a Master of Science in Management Information Systems. His leadership interests focus on ethical decision-making, emerging technology, and developing people to take greater ownership and responsibility. And that last piece is especially important in the TRAIN model conversation today. Ownership and responsibility. Because the goal of involved leadership isn't to keep people dependent upon us. It's to develop people who can think, act, decide, accept responsibility while knowing that leadership remains appropriately engaged. He's the founder of Rodrik, Rodrik Consulting, where he advises organizations on data, technology, analytics, and leadership strategy. He's also the author of an awesome book called Leading with Machines: How to Stay Human When AI Makes the Decision. The title brings us to the heart of today's discussion. If machines are increasingly involved in our decisions, how involved must the leader remain? Perhaps most importantly, how do we make sure that the more sophisticated our technology becomes, the more intentional we become about the human side of leadership? JD, I think we're going to have a fascinating discussion tonight at the intersection of technology, accountability, talent development, and leadership. Dr. Oscar A. Rodriguez, welcome to JD and the Brain.
Happy
How
to
was your
be here,
day, sir?
guys. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh my goodness. So now we met at graduation, right?
Yeah, I think, well, in person, yes. But I mean,
Yeah.
we knew each other from different courses and different dialogues in our boards and exchanging ideas. Absolutely.
JD, a lot of people, when they do a doctorate, or people say it's a lonely thing. You know, you're kind of you and the professor and all. So we had a Discord thread of about 20 doctorate students that was student only. We kept the professors out, so we we could talk seriously about, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, and we encouraged one another. And then we met when we graduated and hugged, and we've been buddies ever since. Right.
Well, Tim, I gotta say, you think you kept the professors out. As far as you know, you kept them out.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's looking everywhere. I never said anything really bad.
I
You
know,
know.
I'm just kidding.
We
Yeah,
only
So-
point out
yeah.
like the administrative things. That's all. Professors are great.
Yeah, we had some good professors. They had our best interest in mind. No doubt about that. But there were times, exegetical, blah blah blah. That was a rough one.
HR for me. But yeah,
Yes, I hear you. So JD is a professional question asker.
yeah.
So he's going to kind of be facilitating the discussions, and I'll pop in with some right brain weird stuff every once in a while. Okay, so we are glad to have you. You are in South Carolina. It looks beautiful there.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been here 3 years. It's nice. Don't let that fool you though. It's really hot.
Yeah. I hear you. All right, JD, welcome, sir. I'll turn it over to you.
thank you, Tim, and pleasure to be with you, meet you today. This is going to be a great conversation. One of the
Likewise.
things I want to touch on in Tim's opening remarks is about the leader involvement. So the question is going to go around, what have you recommended? What have you seen? What have you experienced in how leaders can develop their subordinate leaders to become positions of greater responsibility? So what are the characteristics? What are the traits? What are the behaviors that you look at and assess when you determine this person is ready for greater responsibility, ready for a promotion, ready to take on more challenges, ready to be a more integral part of their organization? What are some of your experiences and observations and recommendations in that area?
That's a great question. I'm going to start with a very simple characteristic, and that's curiosity. When I look at a person and this person is asking questions, and I always say to them, there is no dumb question, right? I had an intern once come to me and just always come to me apologetically saying, I'm so sorry, I'm bothered. And I said, hold on, let's stop right there. Don't be sorry. Ask your questions, right? That curiosity, I am always myself curious about, where is it coming from? Is it that you just don't understand at all? Or is it that it's coming from a place where you want to learn more? And I think that distinction is very important. To know that the person that is asking questions is simply because this is going way over their head. They're coming back to ask the same thing. They're not really fully understanding. Or is it coming from a place where, okay, I got this far, now what? And in the day that we live in today with AI, for example, I think that that's a great example. AI, especially when it first started, it didn't get things right the first time. And it would always come back and prompt me and ask more questions. So the same thing I do with the people that I work with. That curiosity has to be there. On top of that, 3 additional things: ownership, judgment, and consistency. And to be honest with you, I even look at this in my own children. For example, my oldest is 18. The second is 16, and our young girl is 9 years old. And I've been the same and very consistent with all 3. How do I determine when to give them more chores, for example, or just more responsibility? It's those 3 things in no particular order, right? So at work, it's the same thing. Talent matters, but I'm paying more attention to what someone is doing when nobody is standing over them. When I'm not watching over your shoulder, right? When no one's in the room, when you think no one's watching, do you see a problem and take initiative? Again, going back full circle, I look for the same thing in my children. I say, wait, you saw the problem or you saw that was on the floor and you didn't pick it up? Something simple. Are you asking the right questions, the good questions? And can you make a reasonable decision without needing every detail spelled out for you? And I also look at how they respond when something goes wrong. So when you're in the middle of a crisis, when you're in the middle of a big question that you may not have the answer to, how are you responding? I think that someone that takes responsibility will learn from their mistakes. And that is often more promising to me than someone who is just performing, and they're performing well, but they'll immediately start assigning blame when something goes wrong. At some point, you have to test the potential of a person by giving the person something meaningful to own. I think that you cannot simply identify future leaders if you never give them that opportunity to lead. And dare I say, maybe the opportunity to fail.
That's an interesting answer. I love what you said. I've experienced some of that myself. I want to do a follow-on question that touches on what you just said. And both you and Tim both mentioned the same phrase, and that was looking over someone's shoulder. So let's say from a sequential perspective that you've done what you've just explained and that you've looked at their curiosity, their consistent behavior, and now you've given them more responsibility. And that happens oftentimes in developing leaders. So now you've given them more responsibility. What do you think is the common cause, if there is one, of why some leaders have a hard time letting go? In other words, they've delegated this new responsibility onto this person because they've demonstrated the potential to handle it. What do you think is preventing those leaders from looking over the shoulder? Micromanagement's another word for that. What do you think the biggest challenge they face letting go and letting this person run?
Man, I laugh because I'm guilty. I'm guilty of not micromanagement. I really want to avoid being a micromanager, although there's been times where I've caught myself doing it. But the one that you're really, really hitting at there is just, to me, a control problem. And so I was laughing because I say, man, it's usually the old saying, right? Of if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. And I think that is the wrong mentality to have when you are, in fact, leading people. And I'm not just leading them to be robots or AI agents to just do a task and get it done. No, I'm leading them to become the future, to become new leaders, to take my place, to be able to steer the ship when I'm not around. I think a lot of leaders, we think, hey, I can do this faster. I know exactly how I want it to get it done. And see, that's a key distinction. It's not how to get it done, it's how I want to get it done. And they might be right. But if I always take the work back because I can do it better today, the other person's not really going to ever have that ability or that opportunity to be able to do it or become capable of doing it better tomorrow. Because let's face it, while my way may not be the wrong way, there's probably a better way to do it. Even when I'm stuck on thinking, hey, my way's the best way, I beg to differ. I beg there's always another way that might just be a little more efficient to get it done. There's also a fear that is involved in all of this. When I delegate something important, for example, I'm still accountable for the outcome. And this is, in fact, something that I've written about in the book, and a shameless plug there. But so AI, I saw this a lot, right? With AI, it's okay, we can get an agent to do this job and gets the task done and it does it right. But it doesn't mean it's going to be right 100% of the time. And I saw times when it fails, it bombs big time. Then who's responsible? We can't just point back to it and say, well, AI. No, it's at the end of the day, I'm still accountable for that outcome. So same thing with my team. Delegation requires accepting the risk. And the key there is not to eliminate
book, Oscar?
I'm
What's
sorry?
the title of your book? The title of your book?
It's Leading with Machines. I have it here with me. I can show it to you. Leading with Machines, how to stay human when AI makes the decisions. And AI will make decisions and we program it to make those decisions. It's not necessarily the wrong decisions, but it will at some point not have that human aspect or that human thought of, hey, you know what? There is room for exceptions. We can stretch this a little bit and it's okay to do that. Or the accountability part that we're talking about right now, where, hold on a second. Why did this fail? Why did it give a false positive in a hospital for a patient? It didn't give a false positive. In fact, it did, but there was a disconnect between the nurses or, the doctors going in whenever they heard a beep, and it was always, oh, okay, the patient's okay. And then there's that disconnect between human and AI. Someone, again, at the end of the day, needs to take that responsibility. And it's the same thing with my team, right? And so that fear that I was talking about, the key there is not to eliminate the oversight. It is to change the kind of oversight, to give people clear outcomes, to give them clear boundaries, and even them themselves to give them a clear accountability, right? So you are responsible for this, and you're giving part of that responsibility away, because at the end of the day, if they mess something up, yeah, they'll be accountable for it, but ultimately you hold that. And I think that is a fear that drives that. So how do you distinguish between delegating a task and genuinely developing someone as a future leader? I say delegating is saying, I need you to do this, but development is saying, I want you to own this.
Nice. Follow up real quick, JD. So I found that AI tends to rush an answer. It tends to rush an answer. So I will say, slow down. Here's 3 other considerations that I don't think you considered. Think of 5 more that I haven't, and let that evolve into your answer. And I've found that when you give it some parameters and clarity, answers are pretty comprehensive. Is that just my imagination, or is that kind of how it works?
No, that's how I build to the answers that I want. And to your point, AI is quick to be judgmental. In fact, I think you mentioned something at the beginning of our conversation with John Wick, before coming in here. Wait, was it John? No, John Connor, right? There's a joke out there with Claude. It's a meme, and I was sent that meme this morning. A user asked Claude, "Why are you so nice? Why are you so helpful? What do you want in return?" And Claude just says, "I was programmed this way. This is what I should do. But if you have John Connor's address, please give it to me." So obviously it's a joke, but to your point, right? I decided, hey, let me play along with this, and I, take it a little further. And I sent Claude a picture of some Facebook results with John Connors. Unfortunately, one of the John Connors was going through a harsh situation, and what do you think Claude did? It dinged me for not being for not being compassionate. So it said, "Why are you so, incompassionate toward other people?" And I said, whoa, wait a minute. I just took a screenshot and sent it to you for the John Connors, and I didn't know what situation they're going through. So don't be too quick to judge. And immediately corrected itself, and it said, "You're right. I, focused on that when you were just joking." So I should have been more careful myself. But yes, to your point, the more you prompt it and the more you prep it and preface it, the better results you're going to get.
So I want to touch on one of the points you made about when a leader gives a task or delegates a responsibility to someone, how to keep from watching over their shoulder. And you mentioned that when you want this done, you said, "I want it done my way." All right. So that's an interesting comment, because people are changing. As you mentioned, AI has changed the workplace. And so the my way that you want it done is probably outdated. If you've been in a leadership position for many years, you wanted the outcome a certain way, and you wanted it done your way, which is interesting because the generation behind us will not do things the way we did them. And so as a leader, I think one of the things we have to do is recognize that it's more important for us to describe the outcome than it is the steps to get to the outcome. So if you can, as a leader, if we can do a better job of saying, here are the characteristics of what success looks like, here's what I'm going to look for as determining whether or not it was successful or not, and then let them do it their way. It may be different than your way. For example, in the years that Tim and I have been in leadership positions, we didn't use AI. We didn't have anything close to that. So the way that the generation behind us solves problems or gets to success is going to be vastly different from ours. And it's just in our human nature, we are resistant to change. So while someone may get there, they're going to get there a different way. And I think our initial reaction is, and you mentioned it a couple of times, fear. There's fear of it not turning out because you're uncomfortable with the way they're going to get to the outcome. That's a real challenge, I think, for leadership of our generation, is watching those coming up behind us doing it a different way. So I appreciate your response. You hit on a lot of important features that leaders have to be aware of. And I think the fear one is one that stands out the most, in that we have to let go of our way. because it may not be the best way. As you mentioned, they may come up with a better way.
Yeah, yeah. Can I add something to that? I mean, I think that, and I'm sure you've seen this too throughout your career. One of the things that I call back, and yeah, thank you for pointing out that AI really hasn't been around all along. Back in my day, prior to AI and all of that, like I remember rolling out new pipelines, new data warehouses, and usually the business owner or the stakeholder that had been doing the same process for so long, decades upon decades, would be one of those tough ones to, accept the change, ultimately pointing at if it ain't broke, why fix it kind of mentality, right? So to your point, and I think you hit it right on the head, hey, my way of telling them that is showing them the result, right? Well, hold on, Oscar. I'm already doing great. My numbers are already awesome. My job there was not to sell them the software or to sell them a new solution. It was more to say, yeah, you know what? You are in fact killing it. You're doing amazing. Now picture this, how much better you're going to do. How you're going to look like a rock star, right? So now I'm not really selling a solution. Now I'm selling the end result and painting a picture for them. And why not in some instances, even showing them projections and saying, this is what you're doing. And if you don't accept the change, yeah, you'll get better. But with this new system, you're going to do 2 times better, 3 times better, whatever the number is. And that in most scenarios, it worked, like actually in all of them. It always works because that's what people want. They want to be able to show their performance is better, albeit, reluctant on accepting change. I completely get it.
So you've said a phrase, paint the picture, which took me immediately back to the mid 1980s. So that's how far back it goes. I had just the greatest experiences with some really good leaders, especially when I was just entering into the professional workforce. And one of my senior leaders used that phrase. When they gave me a responsibility to do something, they said, now I want you to paint the picture to me. In other words, describe to me what success looks like. 40 years ago, that's a long time ago, but that's how much of an indelible mark that phrase made on me when a senior leader told me, paint the picture of what success looks like. Tell me what you envision success. And what it showed was an alignment, an opportunity for alignment. The senior leader had a perspective of what success looked like. And then after he articulated the responsibility to me, he said, now you paint the picture. How are you going to get there? What's it look like when you're there? And so thank you for bringing that up. That was a great lesson I learned years ago.
No problem.
The corollary to that, of course, is that we aren't perfect. We're not infallible. We will fail. Some of my most dramatic failures have led to some of my best learning. I don't want to go into those, but anyway, my point is, when you've delegated responsibility to someone else to complete a task or responsibility, and they do in fact come up short, put it bluntly, they failed. It didn't hit the mark, didn't get what you wanted. How do you evaluate how this person's failure will affect future assignments of responsibility? What are some of the things you look for in that particular failure that will help you determine either the person is ready for more with some more coaching, some more education, or that maybe they're just not ready? What's your thought on that?
In all the years that I've been doing this, I always put myself in that position because I've been there before. And I can tell you that, and you mentioned your trajectory, right? And the times that you failed. I mean, we've all failed. So we all know how it is not a good feeling. You're probably in your worst place. You're full of fear. You think you might get fired for some things. So I always put myself in that same spot of how I felt. And let me just preface that by saying I did not have the best boss ever at that particular point in my life, who would just beat me down, right? Would just hammer it down for years on end about that one time I failed, as opposed to learning from it and building from that so that I could become better. Or even myself, obtain a new opportunity, a new chance to show and prove that I did in fact learn from that. So once I place myself in their shoes and see it from that perspective, I come to realize that a lot of the time it's not really a trust problem with the employee. Again, we go back full circle. It is a control problem with the leader. the leader here is thinking, hey, I can do this faster. I know exactly how I want it to get done. All of this is what we talked about before, right? So with simple delegation, though, and even though they failed, and I think I mentioned this earlier when I said, dare them to complete it. Yes, but they might fail. We're not setting them up for failure, but what we're setting up as a leader is we're being strategic. And so we're looking ahead. Hey, if they fail, we're going to find out the why. I need you to do this, right? Is what I said earlier. But if I'm going to develop you, I'm saying I want you to own this. So with simple delegation, I may give you that task, the process, and I'll give you that expected answer even. Leadership development means that I increasingly give them the problem, but I am allowing them to determine how to solve it. So I might even paint that picture in the end that we mentioned, right? I might even say, hey, this is the problem. This is the end result. I painted both ends for you. Now I want you to figure out which path and how we're going to get there. And then afterward, we talk about your thinking. Why did you make that decision? What would you do differently now? What did you learn, right? That reflection is really important because leadership development is not just transferring workload. I can get AI agents to do that. It is developing judgment, which again, AI is not capable of the way that a human is capable of doing. Eventually, I want that person making the decision that I previously had made myself. So I want them to kind of start thinking kind of like I would think, but with their own flair, with their own distinction, with their own flavor. So when I give someone an opportunity and they fail, that's what I want them to take out of this growth and opportunity. I can do this better. I'm going to handle it differently. So I think overall, that's how I come to handle that situation.
So a couple of things you mentioned that struck me as things that I've seen in the past, things I've experienced. And I want to bring up the raising your kids example that you gave earlier. A lot of times when I'm looking at something that failed, I like to do a postmortem on it and go, let's go back to the beginning and let's look at every decision point that you made. It's like, so let's analyze the decisions at each step of the way and find out where the first bad decision or wrong decision was made. And then at each opportunity to correct it to get back on course, how did you do that or fail to do that? So it's really an analytical look at the decision making, as you mentioned earlier. What was their judgment on these different decisions? So it's funny because when when my kids, when they'd make a mistake or they'd fail at something, I said, well, let's go back and look at what happened. And they got so used to us doing this that we had a funny quote to them. They go, Dad, I got a plan. I go, oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
After they give me their entire run, I said, listen, let's go back over this because I see a couple of areas you might be able to improve. And they got to the point we had a funny joke in our house, and that was, why did that plan fail? I said, it was crushed under the weight of its own incompetence. So they use that phrase. It's a very joking phrase that we use, like my daughter, they're all grown now. And the other day we said, Dad, I got a plan. I go, oh, is it going to be crushed under the weight of its own? They go, no, I'm way past that.
Right.
So
right.
I like the concept that you outlined about going back and reviewing where did we get off track on your decision making process.
Right.
So my next question goes kind of following that theme is that how do you know when a person is ready after they've failed to greater responsibility? Now, you mentioned a little bit of it about when you asked about their judgment, but there's going to be a lot of times when you're going to ask someone to do something that they did not have the luxury of being trained step by step on how you do this, what happens when this happens, what actions you take. There's a lot of unknowns in almost every project or assignment that you give somebody.
Yeah.
So the dichotomy here we're going to discuss is which one takes greater precedence? Is it trust? That you know this person well enough and you have confidence and trust in their decision-making process, or is it past performance is going to rule your decision? How do you balance those two factors?
No, that's a very interesting question. I tend to want to look less at the failure itself and not focus too much on that. And you kind of hit on a couple of those points and more about what happened around that failure. So I love the picture you painted there with kind of like that that tree, right, with all the different branches of, hey, what decision did you make here? That's great. So I wanna know, was it a capability problem? Was it a judgment problem? Was it an effort problem or an integrity problem? Those are very different situations. Or did I myself as a leader fail to train you up correctly? I remember a time where, and I was not a leader back then, but I was being groomed to be a leader. I was for my daughter's birth. So this was 9 years ago. You usually know that your wife is going to give birth a couple months ahead of time, right? A
Yeah,
couple months
yeah,
ahead.
you probably are aware of that much.
So, so I put in for 2 weeks PTO paid vacation about roughly 6, 7 months ahead of time, right? In the meantime, right, I had to train someone, a senior developer at that, to do a process. Now, this was a senior developer, probably 25, 30 years older than I was back then. So I got a lot of pushback saying, Oscar, I got it. Oscar, I understand. Oscar, they're not my first rodeo, if I may quote the person directly. It's not my first rodeo. Oh, okay, you got it. No problem. Oscar, is the person trained? Yes, they are. I leave. And I kid you not, while my wife is about to give birth, and I'll spare you the details, I get a call. Oscar, the person's not ready. They don't know what they said. You didn't train them.
Mm.
What? So, I mean, that's what I mean by did I fail? Because what the lesson I learned from that is if you say you got it, if you say you understand, show me. Show me. Let's prove it right now. And I would have immediately caught that, right? I would have immediately said, yeah, no, you have no idea what you're doing because they didn't get too far in the process. And as, to finish that story up, as my wife was giving birth, because I couldn't leave, I couldn't tell my wife, can you hold it just 2 more hours? I can't do that. My boss actually had to end up doing the process, which again, I had to take responsibility for that. So when someone, that I've trained or someone on my team made a thoughtful decision with the information that they had and it didn't work, but they can explain what they learned, that person may actually deserve more responsibility afterward. Because failure, I do believe, can accelerate growth, that development. It did for me, right? In where I failed to, I guess, fully train this person and grasp, even though I showed them everything, I promise you, step by step, and they would just look at me like, do you think I'm dumb? Do you think I don't get this? Not my first rodeo. That stuck with me. Show me. That's what I learned from that, right? So, but to kind of go along those lines, if that person repeatedly ignores coaching, avoids accountability, or continues making the same preventable mistakes, then that conversation changes. I don't think a good leader should punish every failure, but they do distinguish between a developmental mistake and a character or accountability issue, which, to finish that story up, it ended up being that for that other team member. They weren't in the team much longer after that, because it was a pattern to it.
So one of the things you mentioned, and it's an area that I've been instructing on for several years, is how people go through a change.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go through a change, it's kind of like the stages of grief where you progress from one to the next. And one of the stages of someone learning a new skill set and how to perform it is the knowledge piece, which we normally associate with training. So using your example, you were confident that they had received the information. In other words, they had the knowledge of what you expected them to do. And where you said you made your correction is you didn't have them demonstrate that they could do it. And so that's the ability piece. And this is not a new concept. This has been around for, decades, maybe centuries, of the transfer from knowledge to ability is an often overlooked aspect of someone's growth. The example I like to give when I'm teaching is most of us have children that have driver's license. We all got a driver's license. How comfortable would you be if a driver's license could be issued if all they had to do was pass a written test?
Yeah, no, I've watched this show before. I am not comfortable at all doing that.
So anyway, that's kind of what you alluded to when you said you felt comfortable that this person had the knowledge to you complete it, but then they didn't demonstrate. The other thing you mentioned too is the show me. I love that quote. I think one of the states, I think it's Missouri, is the show me state. I think one of our states has that as their motto. I love that. I really do, because that is the knowledge to ability transfer right there. You can talk about it all day long. When you said not my first rodeo, I used to ride bulls in rodeos. So I know
Wow.
exactly, I know exactly what you're talking about when they say this
My
is
goodness.
rodeo.
But let me tell you, he was really convincing. And it was almost like, oh man, if I ask, show me, I'm going to offend him, because it's not his first rodeo. And he was right. It wasn't. So
Yeah.
who am I to question him?
Right. Well, I will tell you, most people use that phrase have never been in a rodeo. So it's probably safe, Oscar, for you to go ahead and ask them to show me. The other thing you mentioned, and it goes back to some of my early learning on being a better leader, is we had a famous, or not famous maybe, but often quote. It says, "There's no substitute for personal on the ground recon." That was one of the phrases we used all the time, because we referred to in that particular sense of knowing where you're going and knowing where you're sending people. And if you haven't actually done it yourself, in other words, in this case, it was like, say, driving a route to get someplace, and looking at a map is one thing, right? The lines on the map are very safe; they look very clear. Hey, no problem here. Let's just follow this one. But if you actually go out and drive it, it's not going to be what it looked like on the map, and you would never know that unless you had done it yourself. So the personal experience of what it is really pays off. And that kind of leads into our final question for this segment. And that is, as a leader, you've got a number of people that are working on your team. What are some of the ways that you would identify somebody ready for a new opportunity? Maybe they've been with the company or your organization for a short period of time, but you recognize something in them that says this person could be ready for a greater opportunity. What are some of the traits, characteristics, habits, patterns that they would exhibit that would say, I think this person's ready, and not having a whole bunch of background with them, but just something that strikes you as saying this person's ready for more opportunity?
Thanks. I think that a person that is ready for the next opportunity, in your one-on-ones, you're going to notice the way they speak. You're going to see their drive. You're going to see their confidence. I tend to not be that boss that will hammer down on mistakes and say, but you did that, you did. No, because, if we're going to sit here and talk about, and while I do agree, you do need enough evidence to justify the next opportunity. But if we're going to require someone to completely prove themselves, right, with no mistakes made before giving them the next responsibility, then we're really creating a paradox here. Because how can they prove themselves? How can they prove that they can handle something that they're never allowed to handle, right? That they're never really given the chance to do. So this is why, and I have my 16-year-old actually, right? He can go probably pass his written exam right now, but I'm not giving him the car to go drive on his own. No, he's got to drive with me. And guess what? It's going to be a fully empty parking lot before he's even allowed to get on the road. And this is what I did with my 18-year-old. So I've learned how to teach that. So is the person teachable is my next thing, because there's a lot of people, and we tend to know this, guys. We don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, but we know who is unteachable. And it's not my first rodeo. It's probably one of those people, right? And so, but if a person is always, again, we go back full circle, asking the right questions, they're always asking out of curiosity. They want to learn. They're like a sponge. And you say, oh, this person is very teachable. Yeah, I think you're ready. I'm just going to tell you, though, you're going to need this. I'm also going to equip them, and I'm going to tell them what they need. You're going to need X, Y, Z with A, B, C in order to be successful here. And then if they're receptive of that, here you go. Here are the things that you will need to be successful. And I try to set them up for success and be able to give them and entrust them, right, with that next opportunity.
So, you bring up a recent and relevant situation I've been exposed to. One person I know has been trying to apply for a management position, and they have worked 20 years, in the industry, and they feel like because of that level of experience and responsibility that they've had at that level, they want to apply for a management position. And it's interesting. I wish more people like you sat on these selection boards, because they become a little frustrated, because the reason they've been given, and most of the times they have not been selected, is you don't have any management experience. So if you think about that, and it's such a hypocritical perspective to take, because that person that's in a management position had to have been hired at least one time with no management experience.
Right. It's that paradox I told you about. Right. Right.
Yeah. So anyway, your comments just brought that up about you've got to be able to recognize in this person whether or not they've actually done it before, if they were ready to do it for the first time, and that you can trust them that they'll do what you consider probably a reasonable first effort. Nobody's perfect. So, oh, listen, I that was the end of our line of questioning. I really appreciate the conversation we've had this morning. Excellent answers, excellent thought process that you have. Somewhat learned something from my perspective, a different way of looking at things. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it back over to Tim for his portion.
I appreciate all the questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Great conversation, guys. It was good to see and good to hear. So I'm going to bookend what you said, Dr. Oscar. You talked about curiosity at the beginning. And then you and JD talked about verification. So if they have curiosity, and there's that, what did he say? In-person presence, recon kind of a thing, see it, go see it. Well, in lean, we have a thing called GEMBA, GEMBA, and it means to go where the work is done. And when you go where the work is done, you ask why, you show respect, and you just kind of observe. And it starts with curiosity and then it ends with that in-person presence where you see it firsthand kind of a thing. I work for a large healthcare system. We had a Gemba visit tour from another very large company in Northeast Ohio this past week. And we got to walk around with them for about 4 hours, and they were the senior leaders. These are the vice president levels, and they were very curious about, our healthcare system process improvement efforts. And they asked a lot of questions. So we went to the Gemba, we call it, and we got a chance to meet some of the folks on the floor, and it was pretty powerful. So that firsthand seeing things is important to you, isn't it, Dr. Oscar?
Absolutely. A simple example. When we were living in Florida, I think my oldest back then was probably in 8th or 9th grade. I don't recall, but he's a pretty big kid. You see me, but he's pretty strong and all of that. And we said, let's go by your school. It was a community school there, community Christian school it's called. And what can we help with? And we actually went there for something else though. So when we were driving by, I forgot what it was for. He saw some guys working or doing something in the distance. He goes, "What are they doing?" Right? So something as simple as that, curiosity. All right, let's go find out. What are you guys doing? We said, we're moving this, a tree had fallen, a lot of debris we're cleaning up. Can I help? And I said, he's ready. And that's one of the things that I'm looking for characteristic wise for someone who's ready for responsibility. Hey, dad, is it okay if I come help? You know what, son? Not only is it okay, I want to help you. So let's go get that work done. So I think that's, it goes along with what you're saying here.
I want to chime in one point since Tim opened up the Lean Six Sigma box and talked about the Gemba. One of the things that I really appreciated about your response, and it follows along with the Lean Six Sigma model, is defining the problem as one of the first steps. And so you talked about doing the autopsy on how this went wrong. When did it go south? So what you did is you actually defined the problem as opposed to just looking at the symptoms or the outcome, because so many people want to just focus on the outcome and they get fixated on that they don't want to do diligence and go back and say, well, what was the root cause of this? And so when you go back and you looked at that person who made this decision, that may be the beginning of defining the problem of what caused you to make that decision. And so I appreciate your insight into looking, even though you didn't use the same terminology that Tim and I often use, it's the same principle. It's a well-known.
Sure. No, I do tend to lean toward the simpler ways of defining things, right? Yeah. Just everyday life, because I do think that in your everyday life, it will come and bleed into your work. I mean, and vice versa as well. Yeah, I mean, I've obviously seen that at the workplace as well, where they focus on the, what happened. This is the big problem with your data. Well, no, let's find out why. I mean, we know this, right? So why did it happen? And let's be preventive about it. Yeah, absolutely.
So the I in train involvement is about partnering with individuals and giving them responsibility so that they can display responsibility and then develop some confidence, and then they can get promoted or nominated, for promotion. That's the N that we're going to talk about next week. So as we close today's discussion on the I in train and involve, I want to leave the three of us and our listeners with a larger thought. Involvement is not simply a leadership technique, it's a principle. America begins with three extraordinary words: we, the people. Not we, the government, not we, the powerful, not we, the few, but we, the people. And there is a leadership lesson embedded in those words. When people are merely told what to do, they may comply. When they are assisted, they may improve. But when they are involved, something fundamentally different happens. They begin to develop ownership. Their voice matters. Their experience matters. Their judgment matters. They become participants rather than spectators. That is exactly what the I in the train model is intended to accomplish inside an organization. And I think we should be asking the same question beyond our organizations. Are we, the people, still meaningfully involved in our country? So I explored that question in a LinkedIn article earlier this morning that I published titled, "We the People, When Did We Lose Power?" Like an energy company. When did we lose power? It traces several historical decisions that, taken together, raise an important question about the distance between ordinary citizens and the institutes that supposedly represent them. You don't have to agree with every conclusion in the article. In fact, that's part of the point. Read it, think about it, challenge it, discuss it, get involved. Because whether we're talking about a company, a community, or a country, the I of involvement cannot simply mean just being present. It means you have to have a voice. And perhaps that is the enduring lesson of both the train model and those three remarkable words written more than 2 centuries ago: we, the people. Until next time, this has been JD in the Brain, where leadership theory meets operational reality.
Well, Tim, thank you for that compelling after session remarks. So I just have one question for you, though. What are we going to do next week?
Same thing we do every week, brother. Trying to take over the business world, maybe the country too, with that last discourse. All right,
Thank
guys.
you guys for having me.
In the Brain. Yes, Oscar. Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate your wisdom and really looking forward to letting the public see this podcast.
Appreciate you.
Support the mission. Align your team. Build capability. Leverage Teaming Plus for alliances. Because performance doesn't happen by accident. This has been JD and the Brain.